Hey everyone, my name is Mitchell DePriest, or M.A.DePriest. I'm the writer and or author of Encumbering Ashes and Birth of Shadows, and I'm working on a third to the series for the Unbirth Saga. I also have a children's book called My Dad's Hero, all available on Amazon.com. Anyways, I'm here today because I wanted to read the first chapter of my first book, Encumbering Ashes, kind of give you an idea of what it is and what it's about. Kind of a taste, I guess. And actually, this first chapter, it doesn't entirely reflect on the uh, remainder of the book. If anything, it just gets a lot weirder, a lot quicker after that. Weird in a good way. The best weird is good. You don't want anything too ordinary or too normal in today's standards. So, yeah, I want to just kind of read this first chapter. And of course, anyone watching, if they want to fill me in on any sort of input, that'd be awesome. So, yeah, first chapter is called The Test. Johnny was your average teenager, 15. Although he was raised in an adoption center, he never really knew a lot about the outside world. Johnny had thought for some time why he had been put there. He would think about who his parents may have been. Was his father a fireman? Was his mom a nurse? Or were they both possibly drugged out people whom were too unfit to raise a child? His mind would race about these things, even daydream, but he would often spend his days drawing or reading under a large sycamore tree in the front yard, and watching the cars go by, never so much caring about the places he would go or could go, or the things he could do if he had left the place he called home. Although the books he read were filled with excitement, adventure, love, and the many things he found appealing, Johnny never imagined these things to happen to him. A part of Johnny wished for his life filled with quests and escapades alike. Yet he knew this was unrealistic for the moment he looked up from his book and the stories that had captured him. He felt his life at the adoption center was all he had, but that someday it might change if only he had a family that wanted him. Sometimes he asked himself why. Why over the course of his life? Why a family had never picked him, so that maybe then he might finally live the life he had always thought he wanted. It often frustrated Johnny seeing other kids leaving with their new families. Although there was one time he had thought he had finally been chosen, a younger couple came in looking for an older child. Maybe they were there because the couple were too young to have to deal with a baby or toddler. When they met Johnny, they found it suitable to set up a meeting with the director. It was understood that they could talk and perhaps afterwards set up an adoption date. When the day and time had come to meet his potential parents, Johnny felt anxious, more than he had ever, and maybe even for the first time. So he had sat in the hall, waiting, all to find out that they had decided not to come. Johnny could hear from where he sat. The director, Mrs. Masson, was on the phone. The conversation was short, and Johnny could hear the sadness in her voice before hanging up. It seemed Johnny wasn't the only one that was confused, or at least didn't fully understand the couple's reason for changing their mind. Johnny wanted to ask, but rather than facing further rejection, he decided to do what he always did. Johnny grabbed a book off Johnny grabbed a book off the shelf from the hall closet and went to his favorite spot to read. The sun was just above Johnny in the sycamore tree. Leaves were starting to fall as autumn was around the corner. One leaf fell directly onto the page Johnny was reading. Soon after, tears. Johnny couldn't hold back how he felt, and the story of a haunted puppet wasn't helping. Johnny felt his life as it was now was not enough for him. Yet he knew he had no options left. Later that night, while sitting on his rigid mattress and staring at the blank wall at the other end of his room, Johnny thought long and hard about life. He felt a sudden urge for air, as if the situation was suffocating him, and he so decided to sneak out and take a walk. Johnny never really being the adventurous type. Besides reading the many books about pirates, ghosts, vampires, things of that nature, found this act most intriguing. This being the first time Johnny had ever snuck out, or been outside past 8 o'clock in the evening, the thought of trouble or danger had not even crossed his mind. As he started walking down the street, he realized that he had never noticed how many houses there were around the adoption center until that night. He was overcome with a feeling of freedom. For some reason, it felt so natural to him, now being under the stars, or for what he could see of the stars with the bright streetlights overhead. Johnny had finally got as far as he had ever been from the adoption center, at the corner of Huxley and Vernon Street. The streets were quiet, with a subtle breeze every now and then, with a light above detailing the street signs, making even the simplest things appear more picturesque than they had ever seemed before. The night had become so much a distraction that Johnny had not noticed the very large black dog to his left, until it was just enough in the light so that he could see the head out of the corner of his eye. Now Johnny's seen many dogs before, most past the front or by the front of the center with their owners. Sometimes a few stray mutts wandered looking for scraps from lunch. However, this dog was unlike any he had ever seen in his life, but rather more of something he had read about or even seen in his nightmares. After a moment of watching the creature, he had finally gotten a better glimpse and realized it was more than a mere dog, but seemed to possibly be something as unnatural as a werewolf. Johnny turned slowly toward the beast, perhaps thinking he was wrong, but he was not. In fact, he confirmed his suspicion. As for when he turned toward the beast, it was that moment the beast decided to come closer, allowing Johnny to analyze every facet of his grim face, and in turn made Johnny freeze with fear. Red eyes, Johnny thought to himself as the beast drew closer. Suddenly he realized something that he had not thought of before he had left the safety of his room. The night was in fact covered by a full moon. The beast came so close that he could see his whole body, his claws and all. This, in fact, is a werewolf, Johnny thought to himself, while still trying to stay logical and persuade himself of the improbability of the situation. Yet everything was so real, he quickly evaluated his options as the beast neared him. Nothing seemed to be plausible in such a dreadful situation. He tried to remember every fact that he could have come across in any type of book he may have read, but they all led to the same conclusion, that he was about to die. He saw no possibility of escape. Running would be useless, for werewolves were known for their agility, faster than normal predators, long hind legs, muscular and trimmed with sharp nails that would dig into the ground with every step, perfect for grasping at a victim at any moment with one swing. He knew that even though he stood almost breathless and frozen, that the beast could hear each pound of every heartbeat that his weak body pronounced. Drops of sweat were rolling down his forehead, as if they were teasing the beast's thirst. He started to silently pray that this was all a dream, and that he would soon wake up in his hard wooden bed and broken mattress and see the faded doors of his tiny closet, where he had a couple items. Suddenly he felt the beast's breath on his neck, for it had closed in on Johnny. It was nearly eye level, and yet still hunched over. The street felt cold, still, and lifeless, as if the whole world had disappeared, and that he and the beast were the last to be. "Why do you fear me? Do you not recognize your own blood, your own kind?" The beast uttered in his ear, as if it were another human. The accent, pronunciation, everything was perfect, yet impossible. "Do you not know that you were searching for us as we have been searching for you?" The werewolf paused to inhale further the essence of fear that Johnny produced. "Have you never wondered why you have been alone? Why you've always been alone?" The beast circled Johnny, sniffing, inspecting Johnny as a whole, as if the werewolf was more curious of him than interested in an easy meal. Johnny was lost for words and thoughts. a talking beast in an empty town, and now he was suddenly one of them. He knew he had to be dreaming. None of this would be real, and yet the chill of the night and the heat of the werewolf's breath were extremely real. Johnny began to wonder what he meant by searching for us. He had only gone for an evening stroll to clear his mind, or had he? It all started coming back to him. How he would always look out the window when the evenings were bright with the moonlight, craving to get out of the four walls and the constant search for freedom, looking for the answers in the books he read. Although the fiction was there, it seemed more real than ever. Johnny had always the feeling that he was not like the other kids at the adoption center. I see you really are clueless to what you are, but we will remedy all that shortly. The beast raised his paw and grabbed Johnny's neck. Johnny looked into the beast's eyes with utter fear, speechless. Even the pain of the beast's claw around his neck caused little reaction. Johnny could only wait for what he thought was inevitable, death. The beast took his paw and slowly, with a single claw, cut open a slit at the bottom of Johnny's back, then lifted him in the direction of the moon as if he was showing off a prey he had just captured. Johnny's body hung limp as the beast held him up. Johnny slowly felt the breath leaving his lungs, and the beast's grip so firm he could not utter a single sound or take a breath of air. The beast howled and struck Johnny in the back. The pain was excruciating, and suddenly everything went black. Johnny woke to find himself on his broken mattress, with a cracked wooden bed frame, seeing his tiny closet faded doors. He smiled as he realized that he must have been dreaming, although his head ached as it never had. He began to sit up in his bed, but only to quickly fall back. The pain, he remembered, that pain. He lifted his head to the level of the bunk, grabbing the sheets in an exhausted effort to lift himself high enough only to see the blood stains. His blood. The smell of his blood that covered his sheets and the clothes was so intense. Johnny's stomach whirled, and he began to feel increasingly nauseous. Johnny noticed for a moment his window was still open from the night before, but strangely a black cat sat staring at him from the window sill. However, as soon as the cat realized Johnny noticed it, it leapt out the window. Johnny's curiosity quickly vanished when the pain once again struck him. Johnny struggled to climb up the side of his bed, feeling weak, frail, faint. He began trying to grab at things, only to fall back to the ground. "Oh my God, Johnny, what happened to you?" Natalie, a volunteer from the local high school, came into the room just in time to catch Johnny as he passed out in her arms. Natalie always taking care of Johnny, yet sometimes Johnny felt as though she treated him like a child. "Hey, wake up, Johnny!" Natalie yelled into Johnny's ear. "Hey, ow!" Johnny responded in shock. "What makes you want to always yell in my ear for?" Johnny asked in an irritated tone. "You're bleeding, and I was worried. I have to fix you up," Natalie said, while her own frustration built with his tone. "I'm not bleeding anymore. This is from last night. Did this really happen last night?" Johnny began to question himself, while Natalie sighed deeply. "Well, at least let me clean you up. You don't want to get an infection." Johnny scoffed. "Okay, let's get this over with then." Johnny slowly took off his shirt, trying not to further open the cuts on his back. Johnny proceeded to groan every time Natalie touched on or near a wound. There were moments where Johnny caught Natalie staring at the large cuts. However, before she could even ask, Johnny would break her concentration. "Oh, must have happened from the loose nails on my bed," Johnny said, trying to convince even himself. Natalie then sighed with discontent. "These hand-me-down pieces of furniture are dangerous," Natalie said while putting another bandage on Johnny's shoulder blade. She was right. The furniture was heavily beat up. The wood pieces had splinters and the metal pieces had rust. Seeing as Johnny was the oldest at the adoption center, the bed was the only of its size and no one thought of getting a new one. Or after all, Johnny only had a few more years left before becoming an adult. He could move out or be kicked out legally, and they doubted they would get another 15-year-old. 15 minutes passed, and after a lot of complaining of Johnny's behalf, Natalie had finally disinfected his wounds. "Well, you're all fixed up. You know, I really don't understand how you could have cut yourself on nails like this?" Natalie stated curiously. "It's nothing really. It's barely hurts anymore," Johnny said while trying to hold back apparent agony. "I should really let Miss Masson know. I only put bandages on you, and you really might actually need stitches and a tetanus shot," Natalie stated with concern in her voice. "No, I mean, I will talk to her later about this. Maybe, maybe then I'll get a new bed," Johnny said while trying to reassure Natalie. "All right. Well, I have to start heading home. Take care, Johnny." Natalie sighed as she headed out the door. "Thank you, Natalie," he said, while also noticing a well-dressed man in dark clothing and sunglasses was waiting in the hall staring into the room. As Natalie passed the man, he looked at her and she looked up at him and smiled. The man then turned his attention toward Johnny and prepared to enter the room. The way the man casually walked in, a moment passed as Johnny was ignored while the man began to examine the room. Do I know you?" Johnny asked, slightly irritated. The man continued without response. "Hello?" Johnny asked again while he began to get angry. The man looked toward Johnny for a moment while he stood in front of the window, then turned his attention to gazing out the window. Again, without saying anything, Johnny became furious as the man was completely disregarding his question. Johnny's thoughts came to voice. "Who are you and what do you want?" Johnny asked with an aggravated tone. "So you've been here your whole life?" the man asked as he did not even bother to look at Johnny and continued to peer out the window. Johnny was perplexed, not knowing how to answer. Johnny was speechless, and then the man asked a second question. "Do you believe your friends are safe?" the man asked while his back faced Johnny. "What do you mean?" Johnny asked with immediate concern. The man turned towards him. The shadow seemingly followed the movement of his body as if it had a mind of its own. The man stood looking upon Johnny in a familiar manner. Johnny remained silent, mystified by the dark aura his eyes had seemingly captured. "What about your family?" The man stared at Johnny as if he stared into the depths of his soul. What does this have to do with Natalie?" Johnny asked. "Natalie?" the man said with a questioning tone, as if he did not know that Natalie was his only friend. Was this all a test to get information out of Johnny? He wondered as he took a seat on his bed, out of shock from the situation. How did this man that Johnny had only met know so much about him? "Who are you and what do you want?" Johnny demanded again, but the man ignored him once more and slowly walked towards the door. However, right before leaving, he turned around and looked to Johnny, removing his sunglasses, and his head was tilted towards the ground. He said, "Well, I hope you can protect her." Just then the man raised his head, enough for Johnny to notice his eyes were red. Petrified, it all came back to Johnny. The red eyes, the werewolf, the conversation, even the voice that seemed so familiar. And now he realized what, or rather whom, he had in front of him. The man turned and exited the room, putting back on his sunglasses. Johnny started feeling hazy and sat against the backboard of his bed. So many thoughts flooding his mind about the night before. The unanswered questions began to overwhelm him. He realized that he needed to find out what exactly the man was intending to do to Natalie. On occasion she was the biggest nag, but she was the only one who really cared. All Johnny's thoughts, his fears collected. He knew that if he had lost Natalie, that he would truly be alone. Time escaped him. The hours are flying by, but he had to do something. A gasp of air. Johnny realized he had been holding his breath. His hands shook, sweat pouring from his forehead. Johnny looked outside and felt there was little to no time to waste. He had to find out if Natalie was safe. How am I going to protect Natalie? Johnny thought to himself. After all, he was still pretty badly beaten up from the night before. Johnny knew that he could not just sit and wait around and not do something just to find out later that if he had acted sooner he could have prevented something bad from happening. Johnny quickly put on his favorite sweatshirt and left through his window, running towards Johnny's house. Other than that, yeah, that's the first chapter of Encumbering Ashes. Uh, it gets intense from there, to say the least. But I appreciate you guys checking out this video and hopefully checking out the book later. And if, of course, you have any questions, feel free to comment. Um, if you want to, you can subscribe. I'll probably do another first chapter reading, probably for Birth of Shadows next. And I'm not sure when I'll do it, but I'd like to see what kind of reception this gets and then go from there. So thank you very much and have a good day.